less than a year ago, there was a book released titled Like War, the Weaponization of Social Media. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter are a war zone right now. I don't know if you've noticed this, but at least for me, it seems like the last couple years, this has only escalated. And then particularly the last 5 to 6 months, I cannot scroll through my Facebook feed or Twitter with someone posting a really passionate political rant or something. They're either, debating COVID, whether we should reopen or not, or the upcoming election, whether schools should reopen, the protests. I mean, you name it. And the interesting thing is, I think this is just the beginning. I mean, as I said, we have a huge presidential election coming up in just a couple months. It is only going to get worse. We live in a time right now where things are becoming more polarized, that tribes are getting stronger and further apart from one another. And so it just seems like every day when I go online, I see Democrats demonizing Republicans. I see Republicans demonizing Democrats. I mean, what's interesting to me is these are people I personally know. And they are just personally attacking people. I mean, just calling them names, going off on them. I don't know if this is a phrase from psychologists or not, but it's like cyberbullying. I literally have seen people call the other Satan and demonic. That they're participating in the ways of Satan for the particular view that they hold. It is absolutely crazy. I mean, there's so much more to this in the sense of some of these people, they say that behind a screen on a keyboard, but they would never say that in person. That's a whole other conversation. And even I'm kind of how do people have the time to write these 5-paragraph long posts where you have to click, see more 5 times just to read their whole political rant? I wish I had time for that. But we are living in a time where things are getting more polarized. We're in this huge political and cultural war. But as I step back from this, something that I realize in this is I think there's something much deeper that we can observe about our culture right now, and I think it's this. Human beings, we have this natural bent towards being passionate about a cause. It's almost at times in life, especially right now, we begin to realize that we're living in a bigger story, and there's this epic battle of good and evil. And we want to participate in this fight for redemption, for victory, all in the name of justice. And I think there's some truth in this. I wholeheartedly believe that we are living in a war right now. But here's the thing. What if it's not the war that we think we're in? What if the battle we're fighting right now actually isn't the real one? What if there's actually a battle and a war going on that we can't even see, and we're completely naive and in denial about it? But we're wasting all of our time and energy towards the one that we think is the real battle. What if this battle that's unseen that I'm talking about is actually something that we've been fighting since the dawn of creation? Today, we are closing in on the last section in Paul's letter to the Ephesians. And, typically when you write a letter or you give a speech, The end space is where you give this like concluding charge. It's where your whole letter has been building up for this climax. And so as we get to the end in chapter 6 in Ephesians, we have to ask, okay, Paul, what is your climax? And I think Paul would answer that question with 2 words: spiritual warfare. Spiritual warfare. If you have a Bible, we'll put up the passage on the screen as well. Turn to Ephesians chapter 6, starting at verse 10. You'll notice right away that Paul starts this with the word finally. And so he's already cluing us off that this is the beginning of the end. He's saying, finally, here's what I'm getting to in this renowned letter. So Ephesians 6:10, here's what Paul writes. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. And if you're a highlighter, a note taker, underline this, verse 12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you've done everything, to stand. And I'm just going to cut us off right there. The devil. The devil's schemes. Another phrase that Paul uses here is the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. If you grew up in the church and you did kids ministry or VBS, this is a really popular passage because we love to talk about the armor of God. But if you kind of look at the whole thing, it actually is usually a passage that may make us feel a little bit uneasy. Or maybe when you think of the devil, you think about that little, red creature on your shoulder with 2 horns, a little pitchfork, and like whispering something into your ear, something that you shouldn't be doing. I mean, if I can just be honest this morning, see, most Christians, we say, oh yeah, we believe the Bible. But then when it comes to this topic of like Satan, demons, spiritual warfare, I'm not sure if we really believe that. And I've totally been there myself. I grew up in the church. I grew up in a Bible-believing church with a high view of the scriptures. And honestly, I don't think it was till maybe the last 5 to 7 years that I've come to really, really believe in spiritual warfare. Like not just saying, oh, yeah, I believe, but like, no. This exists. It's real. And so I absolutely know this morning that some of you are in that exact same boat. I get it. I've been there. If you've been here at the Bridge about a year and a half ago, we went through this all-church life group study called Rooted. And I think it's either the 3rd or 4th week of Rooted. The whole week covers this topic of spiritual warfare. And I remember hearing from one group, one of our life groups, saying that they kind of just like skipped over that chapter because, spiritual warfare, like we don't really believe in that. We can just skip over that section. And I don't bring that up to shame anyone. As much as I want to say, hey, I think it's so crucial for us as a church, A, to be honest with where we're at, and then B, so that we can grow. And the reality is this, the vast majority of Western Christians right now, that being in America and Western Europe, don't believe in spiritual warfare. And so real quick, before we hop a little bit more into the passage, I want to speak to those of us who are skeptical or who are uneasy about this whole topic of Satan and the dark forces of the kingdom and all that kind of stuff. So a couple points for you. First one, I think it's really important for you to know that actually us Westerners who don't believe in the spiritual world, we're actually in the global minority. Meaning this, at this day, like in this present moment, the vast majority of Asia, the vast majority of Africa, and the vast majority of Latin America absolutely believe and honestly just assume in the reality of bad spiritual beings. Like, it's just kind of built into their culture. And I'm not talking just the last couple thousand years. I'm talking like right now. We don't realize this, but I think there is a sense as Americans that we kind of think that we have everything figured out, that we are kind of, rational elites, and that devil stuff, I mean, we know that doesn't really exist. And honestly, we come off a little arrogant and narrow-minded. And honestly, my first point is just this. Just know that culturally and statistically, if you don't believe in the spiritual world, you're actually in the minority of human history. The vast majority of Christians and just humans in general, from all of history, from different times and places, have subscribed to some version of an unseen good and bad spiritual world. So that should at least cause you to pause and perhaps rethink this topic. Another point, the older I get, the more I realize how complicated life is. Life is not simple. It's not just black and white. There's always more to than what meets the eye. And so, of course, we look around and we just see things that we can touch, taste, see, and hear. But there's more to life than that. I think there's more that meets the eye. And kind of what I'm getting at is this. Life is tough. Like, absolutely horrible things happen every day. I mean, just watch the news. The last couple of weeks, my wife and I, we were watching the Netflix series Filthy Rich on Jeffrey Epstein. And if you're unfamiliar with it, I mean, he basically was this extremely wealthy guy who formed a sex trafficking pyramid scheme, essentially. And I'm still thinking about it, and part of me is like, is that real? Like, in the sense of it's so crazy, it's so disturbing, it's so twisted that I'm like, how can one guy, one human being, like start this whole thing? That actually doesn't make sense to me. That's too simple. Like, that's too black and white. It actually, for me, from a rational standpoint, understanding and believing that there's a demonic world and that there are forces of evil behind the scenes, so to speak, actually, for me, sheds some insight and understanding on something like Jeffrey Epstein and a sex trafficking pyramid scheme. I have no problem saying that I think that whole thing was absolutely demonic. There was so much more going on in that than just an incredibly wealthy individual who had a perverted mind, although that is absolutely true at minimum. And the last point that I want to say is, just think of it this way. If you're willing to believe in like a higher being, if you're willing to believe in the Creator God, it doesn't take that much more than to believe that there's also other spiritual beings who have gone the wrong way. So, probably most of us here are watching this are Christian, and so we believe in God, that He's this all-powerful, all-knowing, powerful spiritual being. It doesn't take that much more faith or anything to realize and to believe, okay, yeah, there are other spiritual beings, not nearly as powerful as God is, so I'm not saying that, but it's not a huge leap of faith to take that direction. So I just wanted to throw those out just to kind of make you think a little bit. Now, this also needs to be said before we hop back into this passage. There are people who are on the complete other side who overemphasize Satan, right? And we've ran into people like this where, if you have a flat tire, it's like, oh, well, Satan did that. Or if you get caught in a lie, it's like, oh, well, Satan made me do that. No. That's not true. You are absolutely responsible for lying, and your tire just could have had a hole in it. So we don't need to demonize everything. Or like I remember growing up in the 90s, Adam Sandler with the Waterboy movie, and I think it was his mom who said, my mama said girls are the devil. Not true, okay? So not everything is satanic. That's not what we are saying this morning, and that needs to be said. However, I do think because of our natural materialistic culture, we do kind of have to emphasize the spiritual world because we're so far over here that just completely dismisses it. There's a famous great quote on this topic by C.S. Lewis. He says this. This is so good. There are two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the devils. One is to disbelieve in their existence. That's most of us. The other is to believe and to feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. That's what I was just getting at. And he says this. They themselves are equally pleased by both errors and hail a materialist or a magician with the same delight. The first thing that we need to understand about Ephesians 6 this morning is this, is that Paul is reawakening us to the spiritual realm. He's saying, hey, there is this huge battle going around you at all times, and you may not even see it. Ephesians 6:12, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Here's the main point this morning. You are in a war. We are in a war. Christianity actually is all about warfare. Here's the nuance. It's not against flesh and blood, though. The war isn't between humans. It's not between each other. It's not between Democrats and Republicans, Laker and Clipper fans, Dodger and Angel fans. It's not between each other. That's not the real issue. That's not the real enemy. That's not the real struggle. It's Satan and his minions. And we're at a war with them. I mean, this will change the way that you read the Gospels. If you go to Jesus and you look at his ministry, I mean, one of Jesus' main announcements, it's recorded in Luke 11:20, he says this, but if I drive out demons by the finger of God, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. Jesus is constantly fighting the demonic. Jesus didn't view humans as enemies. He didn't see that as the ultimate struggle. Here's the nuance. He saw the evil behind them. He saw the forces of Satan and his team, if you will, working in and through humans. Humans aren't the real enemy. Our battle is not against flesh and blood. And here, you know what this means? Here's what this means. We don't need to waste our time demonizing the other side on Facebook or Twitter because they're not the real enemy. I mean, when we do that, we're actually, you're fighting the wrong battle. You're wasting your time and energy. And here's actually the sad part. You're doing exactly what Satan wants to be done. There is nothing that brings Satan more joy and hope than to see God's children fighting against one another and not realizing who actually is ultimately behind it. And one of the things that we're going to get into is that Satan has schemes. He's very strategic, and nothing pleases him more than for us to realize and think, well, he's not really there. And the real problem is this human being who thinks differently than me. And when we start to become aware and to be reawakened, he doesn't like that, because that then means that we can begin to put him out of business. My first question for you this morning is this: do you realize the spiritual battle that you are in as a follower of Jesus? And let me be clear, it is absolutely a battle. The Greek word for struggle, in this phrase that Paul says, he says, our struggle isn't against flesh and blood. That word struggle there is actually, it's like the Greek word for wrestle. Paul is saying that actually you're wrestling against Satan and his schemes and the powers of darkness and the spiritual forces of evil. Wrestling in the ancient world, I mean, the Olympics was actually created in the Greco world. And one of the main athletic events in the Olympics back then was wrestling. And so Paul, he's borrowing this athletic term, and he's saying, actually, you're wrestling with these things. And so here's the deal. Paul, he's not talking about long-term combat with like a sniper who's getting someone from 100 yards away, or using missiles that travel thousands of miles. No. He's talking about up close, face-to-face, personal combat. When you wrestle someone, I mean, you're touching them. Are you aware of this? Do you know that you're wrestling? You're in war. There's an Ephesians commentator, Clinton Arnold. He puts this in really helpful terms. He provides this metaphor. Listen to this. If a homeowner somehow found out that a burglar was planning a break-in on a specific night, he would lock and bolt the doors, shut and secure the windows, have a security system in place and activated, and call the police for help. But if the homeowner did not believe in burglars, he would wake up in the morning with all of his valuables missing. We have to become reawakened to this reality. We're in a war, we're in a battle. Here's point 2. You need to resist. We need to be proactively on the offense. This is why Paul writes, verse 10, he says, finally, be strong in the Lord, in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. Verse 13, again, therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and you've done everything to do it. Second question for you this morning. Are you taking your stand? Are you resisting actively and offensively the schemes of Satan? I mean, Paul used the word schemes here. By the way, Satan is smart. He's got brilliant strategy. Honestly, it's probably better than mine, than yours. And so we ask, okay, Mark, well, so what does it look like to resist? How do we resist in this battle? Paul, verse 10, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God. See, here's the point. If we're gonna resist and fight in this battle, we have to use the tools that God gives us. You can't use human tools of arguing, gossiping, trying to manipulate a situation, going on a Facebook rant. That's not going to work in this battle. Human tactics do not work in a non-human battle. That is why God has given you and I spiritual weapons. He's equipped us to fight accordingly. One of them is the armor of God, and I'm going to intentionally not talk about that. Next Sunday, that is the whole message. We are looking at the armor of God, so I'm going to leave that there. I want to focus this morning as we begin to wrap up on the phrase, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Listen to this short story. This is good. A little boy one day was trying to pick up a rock. He said, "Dad, it's too heavy." And Dad said, "Son, you can do it." The boy strained and he tried, but he said, "Dad, it's too heavy." The father insisted, "Son, you can do it." He tried again. "Dad, it's too heavy." "Son, you're not using all your strength." "Dad, I am. It's too heavy." "Son, you're not using all of your strength." "Dad, why are you continually saying that I'm not using all my strength? I am. It's too heavy." And the dad replies, "I know you're not using all your strength because you haven't asked me to help yet. There is more strength available to you than what you have. Be strong in the strength of his might." You cannot fight this battle by yourself on your own strength, and you were never supposed to. I am way too weak. You are way too weak. And here's the deal. That's actually good news. Because God, he's made his strength. He's made his weapons available to you and I. We just have to ask. I don't think most of us do that. Have you asked God to lift your rock, whatever that may be for you? Have you asked him? A good friend of mine recently did this. I want to end with this story. This friend of mine, his brother claims to be a Christian. And he had gotten into a really unhealthy dating relationship. I won't give all the details, but I'll just give some. This girl was at least 20 years younger than him. They were sleeping together. My friend's brother had already said he had no plans on marrying this girl. So this was clearly not what you would call a biblical, healthy dating relationship. You get the picture. And so my friend, he comes to the conclusion, oh, you know what? Okay, I need to gather a couple guys together, and we're going to have like an intervention with my brother. I mean, he's claiming that he's a follower of Jesus. We're just going to have to call him out with grace, with truth, with love, but let him know, hey, man, like what you're doing isn't right. Like Jesus has so much more for you than living this way. So my best friend, I mean, he totally believes in spiritual warfare. He knew this was going to be a battle. He knew that he was about ready to step into something that was going to be a war. It wasn't going to be easy. There's no way that Satan and his team want his brother to repent. And so my friend, he literally actually spends money to buy plane tickets for other friends to come from across the country. And because he knows he's going into battle, he goes to the weapons of prayer and fasting. He had a whole group of us just praying daily over this conversation that was going to happen. He fasted for 3 days straight. Literally, no food, just water. Apparently, he had 2 bottles of Coke and 1 cup of coffee, which I don't think was a good idea when you fast for 3 days. So he's getting battle ready, so to speak. This is going to possibly ruin his relationship with his brother. He doesn't think he's going to respond well to this. He's going to be incredibly defensive. Just the other week, they spend the whole weekend together. I think it's on a Sunday, and they finally get to the talk. And actually, his brother says, hey guys, I actually broke up with the girl a couple days ago. And the day that he broke up with her was actually during my friend's 3-day fast. And he received everything that these 3 adult men told him and called him out on his sin. And he absolutely received it and felt the love from them. That doesn't make sense. That is not normal stuff. That is actually, I think, what it means to give the power and strength, God, that's available to us. These are the weapons, prayer and fasting and other things like that. I mean, my friend's brother texted him the next day this is the text. Hey guys, just wanted to thank you for an awesome weekend. I appreciate your words, your heart, your prayers. Thank you for caring about my relationship with God, prayer emoji. That, my friends, is the power and strength available to us. I mean, prayer and fasting are completely humble and dependent things. I mean, what they say at their core is, God, we can't do this. We need you to get involved and to make this happen, because if you don't do it, it's not going to happen. It's only when we empty ourselves and rely completely on God that the battle can be won. See, Jesus, I'm going to invite the worship team back up here. Here's what I want to end with. Jesus is actually the ultimate picture of this. He's the ultimate example. Jesus is why we know we have victory in this battle. See, you don't need to be scared of Satan. You need to take him seriously. But you don't need to be scared of him because Jesus. See, Jesus in his ministry, he was constantly praying and fasting, but ultimately, it was on the cross when Jesus completely emptied himself and was 100% reliant and dependent upon God to raise him physically from the dead, that Jesus defeated the ultimate enemies of Satan, death, and sin. See, the greatest battle ever fought wasn't using human methods. It was by depending upon the power of God displayed on a bloody Roman cross. Paul elsewhere writes, Jesus, having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. Because of that victorious battle on the cross, you can rest assured that God's strength for you in your everyday real battles with the real but unseen powers of Satan, Jesus has already died to conquer him. And when we look at the cross, we are rest assured of that.